You remember exactly how it felt when you started. You had the plan, the new notebook, the gym membership, the course. Maybe you even imagined the person you were finally going to become. And for a while, it worked. You were excited to wake up and work on it. You told people about it. You watched videos about it. You made plans. You could almost see the future version of yourself standing on the other side. Then, somehow, the same thing you couldn't wait to do became something you kept avoiding. The strange part is that you didn't necessarily decide to quit. There wasn't always one dramatic moment when you said, "I'm done." Sometimes it was just one missed day, then another. Then you started telling yourself you'd get back to it tomorrow. And eventually, you looked at the thing you once cared about and thought, why don't I want this anymore? That's when the judgment usually begins. Maybe I'm lazy. Maybe I have no discipline. Maybe I never stick with anything. Maybe I'm just not the kind of person who follows through. But there's another possibility. Maybe you didn't lose the goal. Maybe you lost the experience that made the goal feel exciting. Because starting something and continuing something are psychologically very different experiences. And once you understand that difference, a lot of the things you've abandoned may start to look different. Let's start with the explanation we're usually given. You didn't continue because you weren't disciplined enough. So the solution sounds obvious. Become more disciplined. Push harder. Wake up earlier. Stop making excuses. And sometimes, yes, continuing something requires effort when you don't feel like doing it. But lack of discipline is often a description, not an explanation. It tells you what happened. It doesn't tell you why the task became harder to approach. Consider the gym. Day one feels almost symbolic. You aren't just exercising. You're becoming someone who exercises. You buy the shoes, you make the playlist, you imagine what you'll look like in 6 months. The emotional reward arrives immediately. You feel like you've started. Day 5, you're sore. Day 12, you look in the mirror and don't see much difference. Day 20, the workout has become familiar. The novelty is gone. And the result you're working toward is still somewhere in the future. So you say, I lost motivation. Maybe. But notice what actually disappeared. Not necessarily the value of being healthy. The immediate emotional payoff disappeared. And that's an important distinction. Before you begin a goal, your mind mostly encounters possibilities. You imagine finishing the book, launching the channel, running the race, speaking the language, getting the promotion. The future is vivid. And because you haven't encountered the actual process yet, the difficult parts are abstract. You don't imagine the boring Tuesday. You imagine the finished version. You don't imagine making 30 bad videos. You imagine having an audience. You don't imagine struggling through the same exercise for the 10th time. You imagine being fit. Then you begin. Suddenly, the goal becomes hundreds of small actions. Research, practice, repetition, waiting, mistakes, boring Tuesdays, low-view videos, unremarkable workouts. And the fantasy has to compete with reality. This doesn't mean the fantasy was fake. It means you were experiencing the idea of the goal. Now, you're experiencing its cost. And that is one of the biggest psychological shifts that happens after starting. Before starting, you're asking, what could this become? After starting, you're asking, do I want to do this again today? Those are very different questions. There's another problem. The beginning often contains immediate rewards, novelty, anticipation, a sense of progress, maybe praise from other people, maybe the satisfaction of buying the equipment, making the plan, or finally deciding that you're going to change. But many meaningful goals pay you much later. Exercise may take months before visible changes become obvious. Learning a language requires repeated exposure before fluency appears. Building a business can involve months of work before anything meaningful happens. Writing a book means spending hundreds of hours doing something that may not feel rewarding while you're doing it. So the present experience starts competing with a future benefit. And this matters because your mind doesn't experience the future reward with the same immediacy as the current task. The task is here, the reward is somewhere out there. And if the task is unpleasant, difficult, boring, or uncertain, avoidance can become very attractive. Research on procrastination has found important relationships involving factors such as task aversiveness, delay, self-efficacy, and impulsiveness. So when someone says, I know this matters, but I can't make myself do it, that's not necessarily evidence that they don't care. It may mean the immediate experience is winning the competition against the distant reward. And that's a different problem from not having a goal. Imagine someone who wants to start a YouTube channel. Before they begin, the dream is incredibly rewarding. They imagine making interesting videos, expressing ideas, building an audience, seeing comments from people who found something useful, maybe eventually making a living from it. The imagined future feels good. Then they actually start. Now the reality is research, script revisions, recording the same sentence 10 times, bad thumbnails, editing mistakes, hours of work. A video gets 43 views, the next gets 71, and suddenly the dream feels very far away. The person looks at the editing timeline and thinks, maybe I don't want this anymore. But what exactly don't they want? Do they not want a YouTube channel? Or do they not want to spend 4 hours editing? Do they hate making videos? Or do they hate being bad at something they're trying to learn? Do they dislike the goal? Or do they dislike waiting for the reward? Those are completely different problems. If they hate editing, maybe the workflow needs to change. If they don't know what to do next, maybe the task is too ambiguous. If low views are destroying their motivation, maybe their expectations are tied too tightly to external validation. And if they genuinely don't enjoy making videos anymore, maybe quitting is reasonable. The important thing is that I lost motivation doesn't tell you which of those is happening. You have to investigate the resistance. One of the most demotivating experiences is effort without visible evidence. You work, nothing seems to happen. You work again, still nothing. Eventually, your mind starts asking, what is the point? This happens especially when the final outcome is delayed. You can be improving without being able to feel yourself improving. A beginner learning a language may understand a few more words this month than last month, but still feel nowhere near fluent. Someone exercising may be getting stronger while seeing almost no obvious change in the mirror. A writer may be getting better at explaining ideas while still producing work that feels mediocre to them. Progress can exist before progress feels visible, and that creates a practical problem. If you only measure the final result, you're asking the final result to provide all of your feedback. So make progress visible earlier. Don't only track whether you're fluent, track conversations attempted. Don't only track whether you're fit, track workouts completed. Don't only track whether your business is successful, track the meaningful actions that move it forward. Pages written, problems solved, hours practiced, videos published. You aren't pretending those things are the final result. You're creating evidence that the behavior is accumulating, even while the final result is still invisible, and that can change how the process feels. There is another way motivation disappears. The goal becomes emotionally expensive. You start with, I want to learn. Then it becomes, I need to be good. Then, I need to be good quickly. Then, if I can't do this properly, what's the point? Now the task isn't simply an activity, it's a test. Every imperfect attempt starts feeling like evidence about you. If the video is bad, maybe I'm not creative. If the workout isn't impressive, maybe I'm not disciplined. If I make a mistake, maybe I'm not capable. And once a task becomes a test of your identity, avoiding it can become strangely comforting. Because if you don't do the task, you don't have to confront the possibility that you might fail. This is one reason perfectionism can interact with avoidance. The problem isn't necessarily that the task itself became impossible. The emotional meaning attached to an imperfect result became heavier. And that's why just push through can sometimes be the wrong intervention. More pressure isn't always the answer. Sometimes the task needs to become safer to do badly. A first draft needs permission to be bad. A workout needs permission to be ordinary. A new skill needs permission to look like a beginner is doing it. You don't need to turn every attempt into evidence that you're talented. Sometimes an attempt is just practice. And sometimes there is an even deeper explanation. You genuinely don't want the thing anymore. Maybe you wanted it because everyone around you valued it. Maybe you liked the identity attached to it. Maybe you wanted to impress someone. Maybe you thought successful people were supposed to want it. Maybe you were chasing a version of success you inherited without ever examining it. You can borrow a goal very easily. You can borrow someone else's definition of what a good life looks like. And borrowed motivation can become fragile once the external pressure disappears. This is where motivation research offers a useful distinction. Some forms of motivation are more autonomous, connected to personal values, interest, or genuine importance. Other forms are more controlled, driven by pressure, approval, guilt, or the feeling that you should. That doesn't mean external motivation is always bad. Sometimes deadline, responsibility, money, or other people's expectations are perfectly legitimate reasons to act. But if you repeatedly find yourself asking why you should care about a goal you supposedly chose, that question deserves attention. Maybe the problem isn't that you're failing to become disciplined enough. Maybe you're finally noticing that the goal doesn't fit. And sometimes, losing motivation is not a defect to repair. It's information to investigate. This is where most productivity advice gets it wrong. The goal isn't to feel as excited on day 100 as you felt on day 1. That's not a realistic requirement. Motivation fluctuates. Novelty changes. Rewards arrive unevenly. Some days the task is simply less appealing. So the objective isn't how do I permanently restore motivation? It's how do I make the behavior possible when motivation is ordinary? That is a completely different problem. You don't need to recreate the emotional state of the first week. You need a way of continuing that doesn't depend on the first week feeling. And to do that, there's a simple framework I want you to try. Call it the want, work, why check. 3 questions. And the first one is the most important. First, do I still want the outcome? Forget today's move, forget the routine, forget whether you feel like working on it. If the outcome happened tomorrow, would you still want it? If the answer is no, don't automatically force yourself to continue. Maybe you've changed. Maybe your circumstances changed. Maybe the goal made sense 6 months ago and doesn't make sense now. Quitting isn't automatically failure. Sometimes quitting is simply updating your direction. But if the answer is yes, move to the second question. What part of the work am I actually resisting? I have no motivation is too vague. Try finishing this sentence. I don't want to do this because. Maybe you don't know where to start. Maybe you're embarrassed by how bad you are. Maybe the reward is too far away. Maybe the task takes too long. Maybe you're exhausted. Maybe you hate one specific part of the process. Or maybe you don't actually enjoy this version of the goal. Make the resistance specific. Because once the problem becomes specific, you can start changing it. Third, why did I choose this goal? Was it genuinely meaningful to me? Or did I choose it because I thought I should? Because someone else was doing it? Because I liked the identity associated with it? Because I wanted approval? Because I thought achieving it would finally make me feel like enough? The answer doesn't have to be noble. It just has to be honest. And then there are 2 more questions that turn the framework into action. Is the reward too far away? And is the task too difficult to start? If the reward is 6 months away, create smaller feedback. Track the behavior. Create milestones. Make progress visible. If the task is too ambiguous, make it concrete. Don't say, I'll work on my business. Say, at 9 a.m., I'll open the document and write the first 3 sentences. Specific if-then planning has been studied extensively as a way of translating intentions into action. Instead of deciding in the difficult moment, you decide the situation and response beforehand. And finally, what is the smallest version of continuing? Not the smallest version that magically achieves the entire goal, just the smallest version that keeps the relationship with the goal alive. 1 page, 1 paragraph, 10 minutes, 1 set, 1 problem, 1 email. The point isn't that tiny actions guarantee success. The point is that reducing the friction of re-entry can make continuing easier when motivation is low. And over time, repeated behavior can become more automatic. Not in exactly 21 days, not according to some universal formula. People vary. The context matters, but repetition in a consistent context can make a behavior easier to initiate. So the next time motivation disappears, don't immediately ask, what is wrong with me? Ask, what changed? Did the novelty disappear? Did the reward move too far away? Did progress become invisible? Did the task become too difficult? Did perfectionism turn it into a test? Did I make the process unnecessarily complicated? Did I choose a goal because I actually wanted it, or did I simply discover that I don't want this anymore? Those answers are not interchangeable, and neither are their solutions. Sometimes you need a smaller task. Sometimes you need a clearer plan. Sometimes you need better feedback. Sometimes you need to change the environment. Sometimes you need to remove pressure. And sometimes you need permission to walk away. The goal isn't never quit. The goal is know what you're quitting and why. At the beginning of this video, the problem looked like motivation. You started something. You were excited. Then the excitement disappeared, and you assumed the disappearing feeling meant something had gone wrong inside you. But now there's another way to interpret it. Maybe the goal stayed the same while the experience changed. Maybe you didn't stop wanting the destination. You stopped enjoying the road. Maybe the reward became too distant. Maybe progress became too invisible. Maybe the task became a test of your worth. Maybe the process simply needs to be redesigned. Or maybe the road showed you something important about the destination itself. Maybe you don't actually want to go there anymore. And that matters, because the answer isn't automatically to force yourself harder. The more useful question is, what exactly am I quitting? The goal? The process? The discomfort? The uncertainty? The pressure? The version of yourself you thought you were supposed to become? Because once you know what you're actually quitting, you can finally decide whether to change the path or change the destination. And maybe that's the real skill. Not learning how to never quit, learning how to know what you're quitting and why. So today, take one thing you've abandoned recently. Don't restart it yet. Don't make another plan. Don't buy another notebook. Just sit with it for a minute and ask, what changed between wanting this and doing this? Your answer might tell you more than another burst of motivation ever could. Understand yourself first, then learn how to change.